completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Today we'll be talking about establishment speak. Now, you're probably not going to learn anything terribly earth-shaking, but you'll definitely come away with a solid textbook example of what establishment speak sounds like in practice, because we're going to turn to an actual member of the establishment himself to discuss this. Senator Scott Bedke was apparently recently interviewed by Chuck Malloy, and boy, I tell you, the conservative battle, and maybe I should say it like this, the battle for the actual conservative soul of the Idaho GOP, very, very interesting, because there are a lot of people who claim, well, I'm a GOP member, I'm a Republican, but there is also a very real thing about Republicans in name only, meaning they will talk the talk, but when it comes to their voting record, more often than not, they vote against the Republican platform and they vote with their Democratic colleagues. Is it a problem? Well, only to the extent that a person understands what the proper role of government is. As you will see, to many establishment Republicans, the problem is, people just don't understand that what we're doing is God's work, and it's conservative if we're doing it. That's not how principles work, though, especially when it comes to government. How many people, if you ask them, could tell you what is the proper role of government, or what is government supposed to do? I mean, you get some pretty interesting answers, probably a lot of people doing a solid impression of a brook trout, when you ask them that, what? I don't know, that's fine. But going back to the very, founding premises for this nation, which set forth all the different types of governance that since have been used at the federal, state, and local levels, it's about protecting our freedoms. It's about protecting our natural rights. This is something not well understood, most of all by politicians who have, shall we say, work to do, pockets to line, their own, most likely. Check out this tweet. This was from an ex-user, a Twitter poster, Russell Mann, who says, "Conservatives made Idaho great. Radical anarchist libertarian insurgents have hijacked the Idaho GOP. The paint job is Idaho GOP, but the mechanics are burn it down libertarian. I think Idahoans will see through that." This is an excerpt from that actual interview. Oh my goodness. Conservatives made Idaho great. I have to disagree with Russell on this one, only for this small, but I think important distinction. Conservative principles made Idaho great. Now, that doesn't mean that everything became politicized, because conservative principles could very aptly be described as government stayed out of the way as much as possible and let you go out there and create your own success. That's not how people who are part of the system tend to see it, though. And those who do understand that, well, there are proper limits, and maybe government is not actually obeying the limits it agreed to when we called it into existence, either through the federal constitution or through the state constitution. So let me share with you this some excerpts from this interview from Chuck Malloy with Scott Bedke. Bedke resists burn it down mentality. Oh boy. I think I enjoyed far-right extremist label more than the burn it down mentality. Chuck says it wasn't long ago when now Lieutenant Governor Scott Bedke was a part of a House leadership team that was widely viewed as one of the most conservative in Idaho's history. Widely viewed by whom? Members of the establishment, members of the left-leaning establishment. They were viewed as the most conservative in Idaho history. Let's have some context here, Chuck. Across the rotunda, there was now Governor Brad Little, who was generally preaching the same conservative gospel in the Senate. Okay, so my apologies. Bedke was a representative, and Little was in the Senate. So, they're both preaching the same conservative gospel. These guys were a very good indicator, I think, by the policies they support, the actions that they undertake, of where exactly leadership in the state is in terms of its principles. You can look at their actions. You don't even have to look at their words. Nevertheless, let's continue on with Chuck Malloy's interview. Bedke told him in a recent visit at his state house office, "Now we're not viewed as conservative enough. Give me a break." Now, he says the Idaho Freedom Foundation, the legislature's Freedom Caucus, and others to the right say that Bedke and Little's administration as a whole is not conservative enough. Okay, hold up for a second there. We are talking about the same administration that locked down the state and has never apologized or since even taken responsibility for it, much less worked to make sure that such a mistake could not happen again. That administration, that small government, okay, just making sure we're talking about the same one. They will say that government spending and taxes are too high. Again, that's a very reasonable thing to say, given how much government has grown. And at least some conservatives go as far, so far, as labeling establishment Republicans as rhinos. Or more accurately, calling them out for what they are actually behaving as, which is acting as Republicans in name only, not in their actions. So this is from the good folks at IACI. This is just, their business leaders endorse, Idaho business leaders endorse these candidates. So don't think it's so crazy that, Idaho Freedom Foundation and others, they have these scorecards and it's just so unfair. No, it's not. And the big time lobbyists have their own scorecards as well, because they need to know who can they count on to help them do their business. Stop Idaho Rhino says, hey, what's wrong with a scorecard for legislators? IACI has one. It helps conservatives know who the IACI whores are. This is where it gets interesting. All scorecards are useful, even those we disagree with. Alex Caval, Sarah Cheney, Lori Bishop, they're all IACI call girls. That is helpful information. Now, apparently somebody took extreme exception to Stop Idaho Rhinos using the term call girls. Apparently the first oldest profession was pretty upset with the second oldest profession for some connection being drawn there. But nonetheless, one more reply here from Stop Idaho Rhinos. All these people are call girls for IACI. How do you know that? Because IACI is endorsing them before many of these even have announced their candidacy. How could they know? It's a fair question. And if you think there isn't massive coordination going on between IACI and these puppets, he says, I have a bridge to sell you. Do you think these people won't sell out their constituents for the almighty dollar? I have a bridge to sell you. Okay, it's, this is how things are done. But, for Scott Bedke to be upset that, it's just not fair that they're keeping score and calling names and saying things that we don't like. Maybe you're being called out rightly, for things that you're doing that are not correct. Back to Chuck Malloy's opinion piece. He says, Bedke will be hearing plenty of Rhino talk in a few years if he ends up running for governor. For now, he's not shy about defending what Republicans have accomplished over the last 3 decades and gives props to Little's leadership. He's a good administrator and good governor and cares deeply about the state. Now listen, the proof is in the pudding. We've had decades of traditional conservative leadership here. What exactly does that mean? It'd be nice for him to define this. And here in the state, and created a state where everybody wants to move to. That's a politician taking credit for creating a state where everybody wants to move to. Do you see what is going on here? This is I'm sorry, Scott, this is where you're out of step. It's not government's job to make the state a place where everybody wants to move to. It's the government's job to get out of the way so that private business and commerce and community and other things can make the state a place everybody wants to move to. It ain't about the politics unless you're a politician. Our economy is unrivaled, he says. It's the fastest growing state and the quickest to recover from downturns. Now we criticize the people in the offices that have been integral in making Idaho the success that it is. That doesn't make sense to me. I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense to him. Because he is trying to define success purely in economic terms. Most politicians do this. When you ask them, how are we doing as a community, as a state, as a nation? They will always try to turn to economic terms. Well, the only matrix we have by which to measure that is, how many jobs have we created? How much have we saved people? The measure of good government is how free people are to go out there and create the society that they want. It's not to micromanage and centrally plan and, minutely plan every little detail. Okay, this is something Bedke doesn't see. That's why he's taking credit for something that he really shouldn't be taking credit for. And of course, Governor Little as well. Well, we're criticizing the people in the offices that have been integral to making Idaho the success that it is. It's not the government's job to make Idaho a success. What's made Idaho a success has a lot more to do with the kind of people who are drawn to this state And that doesn't mean they all march in lockstep. It just means that they understand that there are some things out here where there is a traditional sense of what is real versus what isn't. And there's a lot of people coming into the state. And this is, ask one of these politicians, how are our kids doing in our schools? Are they learning things that are useful? Oh, yeah. Some men have periods. Yeah, that's really useful stuff. So in Bedke's eyes, Malloy says the policies have reflected Idaho values. It's hard work. It's pay as you go. It's being careful with the taxpayers' money. So, I mean, this is just spun so beautifully. We've been just, so good and so careful. No, they haven't. How do I know that? Because they have a surplus of money right now that they've been taxing away from people. That means government is operating beyond what is needed. I mean, is there another explanation? Well, somehow people just were generous and kept sending. You're taxing them too much. Back off the size of government. That wouldn't be a problem, or it wouldn't be an issue. I'm sure it's not a problem for those in government going, oh, cool. Yeah. Where can we put this money to work? He says, we've been discovered, and it turns out to be a pretty dang good way to manage the state. Again, there are certain things that need to be managed, but most of the affairs of governance, the day-to-day living, that's supposed to be left to us. Now, he says that's not to say there aren't things we can't improve on, but he only wants to do it through the force of government. But the success we enjoy right now is directly attributable to the decades of traditional conservative approach to government, and now that's not good enough. No, that's exactly the problem, though. I don't even think he understands. He just diagnosed the problem. It's the conservative approach to government that is being ignored. Government is being grown. He doesn't see it. He doesn't recognize it. Why? Because he's part of the problem. Now, and here, when you ask him, okay, well, so tell us how conservative you are. This is the classic politician answer. As for his personal conservative values, in quotation marks, he said, there's no question where I stand. Let's assume that there is. Maybe what would you tell us? And there's no question where I stand on guns. But maybe you'd like to tell us just to be safe. Do I wear it on my sleeve? No. Do I demagogue that for short-term political gain? You damn well do. I mean, no. But don't take my guns away and stay out of my family life. If the indicator is going to be my position on God and country or Second Amendment or lightest touch of government, those are the Republican values that I will not deviate from and never have. I believe I can match my Republican credentials with anyone in the state. How does your action as a leader, as a legislator, how do your actions in political office match up, though, with the Republican Party platform? Okay, I mean, if that's assuming that you're aspiring to be a Republican. Sorry, Bedke, but this is where, if your policies don't match, then I'm sorry, you're crowing, but you're not really living up to what you say you hold to. Now, the state Republican Party, which once served as cheerleaders for GOP office holders, is now calling out incumbents for not adhering to certain standards. So says Chuck Malloy. This is where Bedke says, well, the paint job is Idaho GOP, but the mechanics are burn it down libertarian. And I think Idahoans will see through that. They're criticizing arguably one of the most successful systems of states out there. They're criticizing the people who are ignoring the principles that has allowed this state to become such a desirable place to go. You don't have to be fanatical to recognize Idaho is an island of freedom. And that's what it represents to a lot of people. And there are people, because of their controlling nature, and sadly, this doesn't mean even people, outside of everybody's outside of the Republican Party, even some Republicans. Their controlling nature is, I need to be able to tell people what to do. I need to tell them what to think. By the way, he was asked about, Bedke was asked about the launch program. And now, critics label the program as socialistic, according to Chuck Malloy, but Bedke says, I'm a big fan. Okay, this is where departure from principles, again, can be seen. He says it's one way that students can learn a trade, find a job, and stay in Idaho, as opposed to fleeing the state after graduation. Look, I know some do because that's where opportunities can be found, but for the most part, why is government the only way that this could be provided? So Bedke sees it as a winning formula for all, and from a conservative standpoint, a wise return on the state's investment. No conservative who understands economics in the least is going to be returning to this as an investment. Well, the state's investment. No, it's the taxpayers' money being used to pick winners and losers. Plain and simple. That's what it is. But please, Take a look at what Senator Glenita Zuiderveld has to say about this. I think she sets it straight perfectly, saying, look, if this is such a great opportunity for students, you wouldn't have to advertise for it. We should never pay to promote or market government-funded programs, unless Idaho is now a corporation. And she's right. They're playing in the free market. The government is picking winners and losers as opposed to letting the market determine what people want. I know there are a lot of people who don't trust the free market. A lot of even people on the conservative side of the spectrum. Well, just in case, we better have something going on. But that reflection on the part of Scott Bedke that, well, we're the reason this happened, and it's a solid GOP leadership that shows this. That is classic statism. Now it's right-leaning statism, but it's still that belief that everything that's not under the direct control of the state is somehow by definition out of control. It's not the case. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because we have people pushing very hard right now for ranked choice voting to keep people like Bedke in power, to elect more people like him, people who will speak like a GOP representative but govern like a Democrat. Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, says ranked choice voting is a great approach if you want to elect Democrats and Republicans who act like Democrats. Otherwise, it's a terrible idea. He's referencing an article in the Federalist that shows ranked choice voting proponents are trying to deceive voters into adopting the system for U.S. elections. There's a lot at stake here, and I'm not one who's about, this is the most important election of our lifetime, but I think there is a principle that needs to be considered here. And thank you, George Orwell, for pointing it out. Of people that elect corrupt politicians, especially those who do it knowingly. Yes, but this is our corrupt guy. They're not victims. They're accomplices. And this would go for people within certain, industries that have great ties and great lobbying groups that likewise are trying to elect politicians who will do their business. Wink, wink. So you've had a little bit of a primer here in establishment speak. It's not a terrible, it's not like Klingon. It's not a horrible grating language to listen to, but it's very easy to be deceived by if you're not paying attention. The key is, do the actual actions of legislators and other elected officials, do they match their lofty words? Most of the time, you know what the answer is, and it's not just no, it's hell no. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this